Buy, sell or rent out your property with Century 21 and you could win a 2-bedroom apartment on the Sunshine Coast worth over $400,000. Visit c21win.com.au to find out how.
Welcome back to Your Property Empire. Well, joining me on the show tonight is John Flavell, CEO of Mortgage Choice, and we've just been joined by Charles Tarbey, Chairman and owner of Century 21 Australasia. Well, there's still plenty happening in the investor lending space, but what is the latest? We've got some numbers that we'll put up on the screen we've got just now. Do you want to take us through those?
Sure. I think that the big change in terms of the shape of the market in recent times is the growth in terms of refinance. So we've seen a real step up there compared to April back in 2014, and at the same time we've seen growth of 43%. At the same time, then we've seen a reduction in the proportion of lending for investment, down by 12% to 24%. I don't think a lot of people are surprised by those, but that's the tail of the tape, as it were. The other big shift that we're also seeing is that we've got the highest rate of people opting for fixed rates that we've seen now since November 2014, with about 25% or 1 in 4 people opting for fixed rates. So your comments at the start, I don't know how you sort of pick the absolute top or the bottom of the market. The reality of the situation is you don't. By the time you do, it's either come or gone. But what we're seeing now is people are saying, maybe if this isn't the bottom, maybe it's getting pretty close and it's not a bad time to contemplate locking some in.
Now, Charles, you're seen as one of the cleverest people in real estate. Can you pick the bottom and the top?
I never have. You always tell people you do, don't you? I think that John's absolutely right. It's just so hard to pick it. I talked to my children about fixing their properties a couple of years ago. And they've still got a great deal when you look at it, but I didn't expect the interest rate to go down 2 times of recent times. And the best way, I guess, to pick whether interest rates are going to move up and down is to actually look at the fixed rates. Look at the 3- and 5-year rates, and they're probably predicting what they think is going to happen. And I think that we're probably close to the bottom if I look out there now. I think if the fixed rates start to move up a little bit, it might be time to do something. But John Simon was suggesting to everybody a couple of months ago, I think you've heard of him, but not to fix rates at all. But to get in there and reduce your mortgage more than anything else. I don't know, John. We don't.
We were talking just before the show about refinancing, and in the old days, people used to refinance it or sell every 7 years. But I was saying, even for me personally, when APRA changed, I had to move banks because my current bank wouldn't change it. So sometimes you are forced to, even within 12 months.
Yeah, look, I don't know what's going to happen. You made some very, very strong comments about negative gearing, very interesting comments about negative gearing. I hadn't heard what was going on in the UK, so that's interesting. And it's disappointing that the governments in Australia haven't actually looked around the planet to see what's happened. But with that, if that change does come in, well, I don't know what's going to happen to rates. I don't know what's going to happen to affordability, and you talked about that too. And for ages we've been saying to local governments the way they plan is just not strong enough, they're not quick enough. And if you go to parts of South Australia, there's a lot of stock. If the various state governments work with federal government, and they knew that there was a shortage of stock for a long, long time, for years they've known it. So it's no surprise that the prices are going crazy or have gone crazy. So there's a whole bunch of things that you were referring to before that I wish people had listened to.
Because with the changes with fixed and with refinancing, how are you seeing that affecting the investors?
Certainly. As far from an investor's perspective, then, the velocity of change in terms of policy is being concentrated around investors. And so, you talked about your own circumstance, your own situation, different lenders, different appetites at different points in time, relative to where they are in terms of the cap that the prudential regulators placed on their lending growth for investment borrowers. So lots of wild gyrations in that space, and people having to go out then and work in a complex market to sort of ascertain what lenders have got the appetite at a given point in time to meet their needs, and that's creating a real velocity in that refinance space, absolutely.
I got a call today from a newspaper saying that they had been given the tip, if you like, that investors were increasing their activity because of, if Labor government get in and reduce negative gearing, this is their time to do something. And I spoke to another person afterwards who's in the area of logistics and keeping that data, and they said investors, and you might have found this, have actually dropped back in the amount of people who are looking at loans. They were over 50% 12 months ago, and they're closer to 40% at the moment. Is that what you're finding?
So from an actual, when we saw the graph before, it's about 24% 4 odd cents in the dollar as investment now, whereas back in 2014 it was more like 27 cents.
Okay, so
it's
yeah,
come down
so
by,
it's really hard to work it out, isn't it?
It's a big chunk.
Yeah, it's really hard to work out.
Yeah, very much so.
Well, we better jump to your numbers and then we can come back to this if you've got a bit of time.
Sure.
But tell us about clearance rates and what's
Yeah,
happening.
The clearance rates are dropped again from this week over last week, but as we were talking a little earlier on, if we just took certain parts of Sydney or Melbourne, the clearance rates would be mid-80s. But on average across the nation it's 68%, with Sydney getting the best result out of all of them, and that came at 75%. But the interesting part was that this time last year Sydney was at 85% clearance rates when you look at the overall figure. Melbourne was 70.8 this time last year, 80.2. So there seems to be a 10-point difference between exactly this time last year from the stats I've been keeping to now. So it's still there, still good in some areas, but the other capital cities pretty average.
And what's happening with the homes advertised for sale? Like, is the election making any difference at all?
It has increased, and I think we talked about Canberra. You know, you never know with Canberra. If people start putting their homes on the market, they might be in a certain party and they're wondering whether they're going to lose their jobs. But they increased this week by 1.52%. But the interesting stat I got out of it was that 11.56% higher now than this time last year in stock levels. So that's really strange. Don't know where it is, but it certainly isn't in some of the suburbs of Sydney.
And what's happening with rents at the moment?
Yeah, they've actually gone backwards a little bit. They had gone backwards in some of the capital cities. Darwin went back 0.89%. Perth went 0.65% back. Brisbane was the only one that had actually an increase. But when you look at the entire state, we're up 0.24%, but down 0.24% for the year to date. So there's your level figure you should be able to see on the chart.
Quite a little drop on the graph there.
Should be able to see it.
And finally on the vacancy rates.
The vacancy rates are not too bad. Melbourne came in at 2.47, better than Sydney, again, second week in a row. Sydney was 2.72. And Perth, 7.59, so it's jumping up and down there. So it's given us an average with those three capital cities of 4.26%.
Wonderful, thank you. So, John, just jumping back to the banks and their policies, obviously a lot of policies have changed with APRA. What else is changing with the banks or the lenders?
Certainly, I think there's the changes that prudential regulators made, as you said, in terms of capping that investment growth. But at the same time, a number of the lenders have looked at their portfolios, and where they've got concentrations in certain geographic zones, or where they've got disproportionately high levels of exposure maybe to overseas buyers, non-residents, then they've made some changes there in recent times. And over this last fortnight, you've seen people pull out of geographies, pull out of postcodes, pull out of asset types, and also say, hey, our policy in relation to offshore lending is that we don't lend to those that don't live on our shores.
It's really quite frightening, actually.
I've spoken to some agents in some areas and they said it's literally wiped out overnight.
Well, there are some locations where banks have said that they actually won't be lending, and this is domestically as well. So it's not just from overseas buyers. But the Asian buyers were blamed for putting the prices up. Now they're being blamed for putting the priers down. I don't know which way are they going to go.
If you have a look over the weekend, though, Charles, there was a development that came on there in Cockle Bay, and it's still, 391 units. No ability for overseas buyers to borrow against it, but 391 units sold out in a matter of hours, $460 million, and it just shows, good quality, well-located property.
And that's the key, isn't it, John? So it's not the overseas buyers, not the Chinese. There's plenty of appetite here in Australia.
And the location. That's what they say, location, don't you, Charles?
Thanks, Chris.
Charles Tarbey, Century 21, thanks for joining us. John, thanks for joining us from Mortgage Choice as well.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us at home. We'll see you again next week. Until then, I'm Chris Gray. Good night.
The information featured in this program is general in nature and therefore should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.